So, as a tank main, I often hear that DPS is the best role to climb with, and a while ago I decided, you know what, I'm going to actually see if this is the best role to climb with for me, and how it's going to work out in my game. So I decided to log on to my Smurf, which is about mid to high-ish platinum, get in some games, and see where I could go from there, and see if I could hit Masters again, which I had originally hit on my main account with mainly D.Va, Winston, and Reinhardt. And today I want to talk to you guys about what I kind of learned from eventually going from platinum to Masters in just about a week on my Smurf. Now I'm going to say that I haven't really played way too much DPS in the past. I think a few seasons in the past I did main Reaper and I got to Masters with that, but ever since then I've essentially just been playing tank. So there's, I guess, some backstory. No, I'm not a DPS main that went on a Smurf and climbed up quickly. It's a little bit different from that, and hopefully I can give you guys some more, I guess, direct insights, being a player that's not really the best at DPS. And I'm going to be honest with that. I don't have the best aim, I don't have the best game sense, my positioning is probably a bit too far up because, again, I do mainly play tank, and some of my ultimates maybe are a bit too early. But hopefully I can help you guys a little bit today, learn how to rank up even if you aren't the best DPS in the game, and again, even if you don't have the best aim or the best positioning, there still are some things that you can do, at least to get to Masters. Maybe I can't help you guys way too much past that, but up to, I guess, high diamond, bottom Masters, here we go, let's get started. So I guess the first point to cover is that you can kind of decide when you're ranking up as a DPS player to go one of two ways. You can pick a hero that's relatively easy, that can do really well in lower elos, that can get a lot of kills without way too much effort, that doesn't take way too much aim, but that kind of falls off at higher elos. And a really good example, the character that I decided to pick, is Reaper. He's a character that does a lot of damage, semi-tanky, doesn't have to have the best aim in the game, and has a self-escape, not being way too hard. Now, a better pick, I'm going to say, almost always at higher elos, and once you get good enough, is Tracer. She does relatively similar damage, more mobility, can pick off the enemy backline, but that's not always what you exactly want to be going for. If you just want to rank up to Masters or to Diamond, I honestly think that there's some characters that can take less time, less effort, and still get a comparable result. It's just that they start to fall off at higher elos, and I think Reaper again is a good example. Higher elos, you start to see a lot more McCrees, a lot more soldiers. They start to do a lot better. Widowmakers start picking you off more often, and honestly, once I got to like pretty low Masters, the games became a lot harder. Before that, again, I think Reaper was a good choice, and when you're deciding to pick your character, think about if you want to be benefited in the long term. Are you trying to make it all the way to the Grandmaster rank, or are you just trying to get to Diamond, and then do you think you're going to stop for a while and maybe you'll pick up another hero next season? That's the first thing I'm going to say you want to start off with. And I decided again to go with Reaper. Now, after I decided to pick him up, I didn't have to put way too much time into aiming, obviously. It's pretty simple. Walk close up. I can already track half decently with D.Va, and that's kind of all you really need to do. So I thought about my main strategy, and this is kind of what I like to do with Reaper and with a decent amount of the DPS. With Reaper, all I did in most of my games was simply stay next to the cart and play around corners, or play next to walls and focus on the enemy tanks. And honestly, that's kind of it. I didn't try to go into the enemy backline and, assassinate all their supports, assassinate their DPS. If I could get out more damage on the enemy tank's shields, or just simply put, kill the enemy tanks before the enemies could kill my tanks, I could win that team fight, pretty easily. When the enemies no longer have any more space from their tanks, then you can go in. Then the enemy backline will have no more protection, and they're going to have to back off. And oftentimes, you can kind of just win a point by forcing the enemies back from the lack of tanks. And honestly, that might be a good enough strategy in itself. If you're playing a DPS like Reaper and out damaging all the enemy DPS, even though you're not maybe getting the most important picks in the game, at this elo, a lot of the times it doesn't really matter if you get the most important picks. What matters more is the pure DPS that you're outputting, and Reaper, Junkrat, Pharah, characters like that can put out a lot of DPS. Now, I guess another thing that you want to consider when you're trying to rank up is your team comp a little bit. And the one thing that I tried to do was always get an Ana or a Lucio. Now, of course, you can't always guarantee that, but I think these are two important characters to try to have on your team if you're trying to rank up in this elo. Ana was nice because she'd supply an ultimate that I could get a lot of kills with. That's honestly the main thing. If Ana ults me as Reaper, I walk up, I start blasting the tanks, I kill them almost instantly because a headshot with ulted Reaper, yeah, they're kind of dead. And then you just kind of go on your way, and again, no space for the enemy DPS, they kind of have to back off, and it went on like that. As well, if I had a Lucio, it wasn't quite as good in some situations because I couldn't live as long, But if I could go in with my tanks, with my D.Va, with my Winston, with the Lucio boost, you could again either dive the enemy tanks, or maybe even with the speed boost, dive some of the supports. Kill them, go onto the tanks, and finish them off as well. I think that it wasn't way too difficult to pull off these strategies. It was as simple as, hey guys, ult me, I'm going in, or simple as, hey guys, speed boost, let's go in. But doing those simple strategies again and again is kind of how you win games in the CLO. It might not seem like the most impressive thing, but it works for me. And I think it'll probably work for a lot of you guys as well, I guess depending on your character. Now, another thing that I feel like most people don't consider when trying to rank up is how the meta is working and how you can use the way other people are playing their characters to benefit yourself. And this is something that I used a lot when trying to play Reaper. Whenever I try to pick up this character, I make sure to pick him up either in a meta where he's good, obviously, or when a character gets nerfed and the meta just completely changes. When the Mercy Nerfs came out, and of course the Junkrat Nerfs came out, I started to pick up this character, and he works in that situation. It doesn't really matter too much what the enemies are picking, because no matter how it goes, you just have a hectic meta, and you have hectic team fights, and in those, nobody knows exactly where to go, no one knows exactly where to position, where to be, when to be there, when to ult. Everything's a little bit different, and with that difference in timing and difference in play, it makes for an opening for you to just open up the enemies with Reaper. And I think that that's kind of what allowed me to rank up pretty quickly, and I guess something you might want to wait for if you really just want to wait for a good time to rank up. And it's actually still going on right now, at least a decent bit. When people don't have their groove on, I think you can just do a bit better, because you don't get countered as much by them, and they don't know exactly what to do. Once they start to get back into the meta, and especially if they start to play really far range characters, yeah, it's going to be harder for me, and it's going to be harder to rank up. But as far as right now, in really hectic games, it works as this character, and the damage output and the consistency, I think, really makes up for a lot of the not consistent plays that your teammates are making. So that's a thing that I kind of like to do. That isn't, I guess, a normal thing people think about too much. Now, another thing I think a lot of people don't think about way too much is how they are trying to play. And whenever I got into a game as Reaper, essentially my main idea was, again, to play next to the tanks and to get out damage consistently, but as well my main idea was to not make any super big flashy solo outplays that would win my team the team fight. Now, you just don't really need to as a lot of heroes, and I think that's the thing you have to keep in mind. Is it a better risk to go in, try to beat the enemies 1v4 and make a huge play and carry that game for your team, or play next to your team, use the space and the healing given to you from your supports and your tanks, and play smart with them? Now, sometimes playing by yourself can do better, and sometimes that's just kind of how you're gonna have to carry your team. And I guess if your team's doing completely awful, maybe switch that way. But in the majority of my games, if I just kind of played with my team and played smart and did, again, my consistent damaging strategy, I could win that game eventually. Now, I didn't have nearly as good of a win rate as I had with D.Va. I only had around a 60% win rate with Reaper, maybe even 58. So maybe it wasn't the best strategy, but it still was good enough to help me rank up, and good enough to help somebody who isn't the best at DPS to rank up a little bit again as DPS. Now, a final thing I want to talk about is insta-locking as DPS, and this is something that I kind of fell into a bit of trouble with. I figured out that in most games you can insta-lock, but of course there is a few big negatives, and this doesn't really exist as tank, because as tank you can play whoever you want whenever, and there's triple tank, there's quad tank, you can play pretty much tank in every single game. But with DPS, if you play the 4th DPS or the 3rd DPS, oftentimes you're making a terrible team comp, you're getting uncooperative teammates, and it's kind of hard to deal with everybody. But honestly, I think that is kind of fair. I mean, if you're playing a character that doesn't fit into your team comp and you're the one that decides to do that, yeah, it's going to make a harder game, and yeah, it did probably make me lose a decent amount of games, and yeah, I probably should have switched to D.Va or Reinhardt or Orisa in a decent amount of games. But I feel like for a lot of players, if you're playing smart and playing well, you still can win in those situations. Personally, I'd rather have you become a player that can fill other characters and can fill other roles, because that's how you're going to rank up a little bit quicker. But if you want to just play DPS, it is a half viable option. It's just that there are a lot of negatives connected to it that tank and support don't really have. And that's kind of how this went overall for me. I'm going to say in general, playing DPS was a harder climb for me. And it probably is partially because I am a lot worse at DPS. I have a lot worse practice, a lot less time on them. But as well because it was harder to get the role, harder to get people to listen to me, and harder to get just time on the characters because a lot of times you might just have to fill out the roles like Mercy and everything. But with that said, by playing simply, playing smart, and playing consistently, I still could climb on this role, and I hope you can probably bring some of that stuff into your own games. And I guess if you want to pick up Reaper and try to rank up with him, personally, I feel like that's a pretty decent idea, and I love having Reapers in my own game, so there's a benefit to me as well. Anyways, as always, guys, thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. If you want to play DPS or not, whatever, that's up to you guys' own opinions. I just wanted to talk to you guys today about how I felt about the role, one, trying to climb with it, and how I personally went from Platinum to Masters in about a week playing on my Smurf as DPS. Anyways, as always, guys, thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Leave a like if you did. Press the subscribe button or the notification button. And as always, have a wonderful day.